Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you are watching this webinar. My name is Dave Nagel, and I'm very excited, as always, to share information with my friends and colleagues in Rutherford County Schools. This is an overview of success criteria, which provides clarity for students to better guide their learning. And this is an elementary specific version with some specific elementary examples. A lot of you watching the webinar have had a chance to meet me. I've had the pleasure to meet folks for several opportunities this fall and past summer in Rutherford working on the visible learning work. But for those of you that haven't, my background has been specifically in middle and high school as a teacher and administrator, but as a presenter in the field, spent a great deal of my time working with elementary and K-6 audiences. I have a sixth grader, a first grader, and a kindergarten in my house, so probably got as much experience there as many. But I have twice been certified in visible learning. It's something I'm very proud of and something that I'm really excited to share a little bit deeper application of that work here on this webinar. If you have any thoughts or questions before, during, or after, please send an email to dave.nagel@corwinlearning.net. If you're interested or you follow on Twitter, I've included my Twitter handle there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in, but I wanted to provide the opportunity to be as interactive as possible. Also want to start off with clarity myself. My learning intentions for this webinar would be for you to understand the importance of developing students' assessment capabilities through clear success criteria, and then to develop an action or an application for your classroom setting for developing success criteria for an upcoming lesson. And you will know you've met my learning intentions when you can do the following. When you can list specific rationale for why success criteria is critical to guide student learning. To list 4 critical attributes of effective, empowering success criteria. And develop for an upcoming lesson or set of lessons some clear success criteria from an academic standard. I'm going to guide us through a specific example on this particular webinar. I'm going to refer to these at the very end so you can monitor, have you met the criteria for learning for this particular learning experience through this webinar. But teacher clarity, which is linked synonymously and in numbers with effective feedback in Hattie's visible learning research. It's critical that we're clear in what we want individuals to learn so we can provide effective feedback. And we have a clarity problem. We have students often who are sitting in class that aren't sure what they're learning or how they'll demonstrate it. We have a clarity problem sometimes in classrooms when teachers aren't aware of what they should be demonstrating, what they should be learning and demonstrating through classroom observations and so forth. So this goes across the board for all learners, whether they're 5 or 50. And far too often we have students in this predicament. All joking aside, I think we've all been there where we're not sure what we want to write in terms of what we really think or what we're thinking you want us to write. So we want to minimize and hopefully eliminate that as much as possible. And the solution is learning intentions and success criteria, which we're going to dive into during this webinar, and how to bring clarity to student learning outcomes that we want for them and need them to demonstrate through mastery of critical academic standards. So why are learning intentions and success criteria important? I'm going to go ahead and read this quote. If learners are to take more responsibility for their own learning, then they need to know what they are going to learn, how they will recognize when they have succeeded, when I should be learning it in the first place. So it's not just what I'm learning, how will I know when I've gotten there, and why am I doing it? You know, I'm doing this graphic organizer that you've given me, not to fill in these 4 boxes, but to separate my ideas, my facts versus my opinion, to separate animals versus plants, to separate nouns versus verbs. That's why I'm doing it, because I'm going to write a paragraph here shortly. So the learning intentions are the what and the why. The success criteria becomes how to recognize when I've gotten there. When the more clear we can be with that, the more we have students taking responsibility for their own learning. I'm going to put this quote up from Mitch Absalom. And I've kind of hit a little bit of that first part of this quote, but that second bullet point, when learning and the path towards learning are clear, sometimes it's research, but sometimes I think we can say it's common sense. There's a number of important shifts for students. When I'm converting from a PC to a Mac or a Mac to a PC or something like that, once I know how to get there, it's easier to accelerate once I'm starting to get it. And I think we've all been there when somebody's showing us something or how to do something new, when we put our hand up and say, okay, let me try this. I've got to do this myself. Once we start to get it, because we see the path, we shift. We see that acceleration in learning. Same thing happens when we see young children learn how to ride a bike without training wheels. They don't ride 5 feet and fall off, 10 feet and fall off, and then 15. It's not incremental. They fall off a little bit. One day, boom, they just get it. Same thing happens in math, science, how to behave as well. So these clear success criteria that we're talking about drive both teacher and student feedback, and I'm going to talk us through that. So it allows the teacher to provide more effective feedback, but for students to provide feedback for themselves, to develop more assessment-capable students in Rutherford County. And when we think about when students are playing PlayStation or any app or any video game, they're constantly monitoring and applying their own feedback. So, question to all the teachers watching this, and for the administrators, thinking of your teachers who are your learners, can they answer the following questions? What am I learning? Why am I learning this? And not because it's going to be on the test. Why am I learning this piece to get to something bigger? How will I learn it? And how will I know when I've learned it? We look at the research of Dylan William and Black and their research inside the black box. Effective feedback doubles the speed of learning. When we talk about effective, not positive or negative, but it increases my ability to grow and develop. The purpose of any feedback is to close the gap. I go back to that example or metaphor with PlayStation. Students know where they should be, where they are now, and they're applying feedback, learning from their mistakes to know how to get to the next level. Same thing happens in a classroom, which is why we need clear success criteria to help students close that gap and to monitor how they're closing that gap. So our first reflection question, take a moment and pause the recording once I finish. Take as much time as you need. I will continue the recording after pausing briefly, but how do you currently use specific learning targets with your students to drive the effectiveness of the feedback you provide them? I'll pause for about 5 seconds. I will assume you've paused as long as you need to. If you're in a staff meeting or a group, it's a great time to pause the recording, do a shoulder conversation, and maybe have some whole group dialogue. Pause the recording as long as you need. Be back in just a moment. Welcome back. As always, I would hope and imagine you've paused as long as you need, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to our second piece. So Shirley Clark's work is profound and really the driver of a lot of research around success criteria. She's an excellent author and really one that provides some very clear and practical information, but success criteria will help summarize the key steps or ingredients students need to fulfill their learning intention. They provide the main thing that students need to focus on, so they won't get distracted by some extraneous details when they're concentrating on reading a passage and being able to respond to what they did in reading. And even if they have to write it down, we might want them to focus more on their ideas than their punctuation and grammar. The punctuation and grammar are important, but I don't want that to distract you in this particular moment from what was more important about the reading. At another time, when we're working more on grammar and we're working more on the writing piece, we might focus less on the actual ideas because we're honing in on that skill. And to be precise, so that way in this activity, in this lesson, in this task, we're focusing on what's most important. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, one of our success criteria was the 4 key elements of success criteria are that they're concrete, they're measurable, they're observable, and at times they're up to negotiation. And I referred on the high school example that I just recently completed here a few minutes before this one. So I was reviewing some student work or some student lessons and activities linked to success criteria. One of the teachers had put on there, one of the criteria bullet points was if you hurry through the task, you'll have to redo it. No, I think we all understand the teacher's intent, but I can't measure or watch or observe if you went through it fast. You might go through it slow and it could be sloppy. You might go through it fast and actually get it. So we want to be careful that we don't take away from things that might get in the way of being clear with what we really should be able to see and observe. And sometimes they are up to negotiation. 2 kinds of success criteria. There's the closed skill. It's right or wrong. There's no doubt the difference of we can look at what a subject or what a verb is. There's only 26 letters in the alphabet. There's only 3 parts of an animal cell. 5 times 6 is rarely equal to something other than 30. These are the types of skills that we can put in criteria that students can monitor themselves. They can evaluate. All levels of children can begin to do this. There's also open skills that are neither right or wrong. And there's a continuum of achievement. Was that really the best piece of evidence? Was that really the strongest example? And this is where we need a menu or might need to have a scoring guide. And this is where we have to help students and guide them through it and where the teachers can come into play earlier. But we can start with the closed and build towards the open. I'm going to take us through our final example and piece now. Effective criteria are linked to a learning intention and a specific activity. So sometimes we can have a learning intention, but our activity doesn't line up with that. We've thought of the activity before what we really wanted the students to learn. They're discussed and agreed with the students prior to it. They know when they're going into the task before we begin what they need to be learning, not how many points they're going to earn or what they have to complete, but what they should be learning. They should provide a scaffold for students to focus on where they're at. And we think back to that PlayStation or Xbox metaphor. Students will play those games relentlessly, trying to get to the next level. And when they know they're not at level 6, it's because they're at level 5 or 4. And they're used as a basis for feedback for both students and themselves. Students can begin to provide more peer feedback. So maybe we have a task to read The Gingerbread Girl, which was one of the schools who I was working with last week said it's going to be one of their activities. So I just decided to align this webinar to this particular task. But we can all apply the concept to anything we're teaching. Well, now we need to think about what's our standard, what will be our success criteria to guide student ownership of learning. And so I pulled 2 second grade standards because this could be a second grade read. First, the Reading for Literature 2.2, recount stories including fables and folk tales from diverse cultures and determine the central message, lesson, or moral. And then you're going to have to write a narrative from a recount of a well-elaborated event or short sequence of events and include details, describe actions, thoughts, feelings, use temporal words, signal the event order, and provide a sense of closure. I will know that I can write a recount when I can write the main idea, tell what happened in order, use sequence words, tell who, what, where, when, and why, and tell how I felt or thought. See the deep connection between the standards and then what we're having the students be able to produce. I will know I can write the recount when I can. Now, for this particular example, I used fable. It could be, we could apply it to a nonfiction or a reading for informational text, which is very similar in terms of the standard. It's just not a lesson or a moral or a folktale. So sometimes we will have success criteria that could stay consistent. We just apply a different element into it. But now students can consistently monitor where they're at in their learning. And certainly what was the main idea, what happened in order, sequence words, very closed skill. A little bit more of the other ones might be a little bit more open about how I felt and what I thought and how I could defend that. So our reflection or maybe our actions for what is an upcoming lesson, maybe something you're going to work on this last part of 2016 or after the first of the year, that you can start with a specific academic standard. That's critical that we start with the academic standard and then develop clear success criteria that is tied to the student task. So we see that clear standard, success criteria, specifically in the task to guide student learning. Pause the recording, or I'm going to finish here with just 2 final points. Back to our success criteria. By the end of this webinar, hopefully now you've been able to list the rationale, why success criteria is so critical to guide student learning and provide feedback. You can list those attributes of concrete, measurable, observable, and at times up to negotiation. And now you can begin to develop for an upcoming lesson or set of lessons clear success criteria from an academic standard. As always, I appreciate the opportunity to share thoughts and ideas with my friends and colleagues in Rutherford. If you have any thoughts or questions, please shoot me an email at dave.nagel@corwinlearning.net or visit me on Twitter at DaveNagelVL+. And please visit corwin.com for more information on visible learning and other products and services that Corwin provides. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day, a great holiday season, and hopefully we'll talk very soon.